I quit my job on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. I was like, fresh out of college. That would be more the family business, working on Wall Street. And so it was sort of it was the path that I thought made the most sense for me. And pretty quickly, about 2 years in probably, I was recognizing, first of all, I met a Czech practitioner, somebody trained by Paul Chek. I learned about organic food for the first time. I learned about mindfulness. I learned about having a dream and the importance of having a dream in your life. And the combination of those three things, what Paul calls a dream line, mindfulness practice, and an awareness of food, or applying my mindfulness to food, those were the three really, life-changing things for me. I, of course, have my parents to thank for like various things they instilled in me my whole life. They were marathon runners, and my mom was a personal trainer, and so they were always very focused on what they were eating and like a huge diverse range of physical activities constantly. But I myself actually became like 250, 260 pounds, super chronic recreational drug and alcohol user, fast food and cigarettes and just everything all throughout college and for these couple of years after, as I was on the stock exchange, before I sort of learned about these things. And it was just an absolute watershed for me. It was frankly the first time in my life, thanks to the mindfulness practice, that I was able to even apply any sort of thinking to what I do and don't like. I was more or less just floating through life at that point. I was a younger brother. I did everything my older brother did growing up my whole life. Then, including going to college and getting fat on drugs and alcohol.
Yes.
And fast food. So we both did it. And, now I was just recognizing this passion and awareness I was having about organic food and cooking and the farmers, and all of that was just so compelling to me. It became my absolute passion. Like, if anyone's at home who's like me at this time, just realize like you're on the verge of a career change. Because if you're basically, what I was doing is all day at work, I was looking up recipes when my boss wasn't around. And as soon as the bell rang at the end of the day, I would go to the butcher shop and spend like an hour there buying interesting cuts of meat and offal and different things. And then I'd go to like this other little artisanal grocery shop and get all my produce. And I'd go home and I'd cook for hours. I'd make a blog post about it. I'd write about it. I had this website called I'm High on Cooking. And for a couple of years I was doing this, realizing that I was actually really only enjoying the time I was not at work. And I was leaving work to go do the things that I was actually passionate about. And that if I didn't start now, I was like 28 or something at the time. If I didn't start now, but I did what my plan was, which was to just work on Wall Street for the next 30 years, make a bunch of money somehow, some mysterious, magical way. I wasn't even sure how that was going to play out, but that was the plan. And then I'd retire and have a second career of these more interesting things that I was passionate about. Maybe I'd open up a restaurant on a farm and do all this stuff, right? And I just sort of had this absolutely impossible to ignore feeling of, if I don't start now, I'm never going to do anything. I'm talking about learning how to farm. Like, if I don't start now, I'm not going to learn this. I'm not going to start in 30 years. And so that was it. Really came out of like a guided meditation. I was receiving a guided meditation. And you know how these things go, like you're walking through the woods or you're walking down these stairs, you're on the beach, you look out there, she guided me down to this place where I was able to sort of access my subconscious. And she was like, on the horizon, you see something's floating out in the water. Like, what is it? It's your future. Like, the thing you really want to do, like most in life, like what is floating out there? And since I had no background in farming and like no sort of authentic archetypal imagery to pull from, out in my mind's imagination, out on the ocean, this like Kidder Peabody plastic red barn is floating out in the ocean, like a toy barn from my childhood. And I opened my eyes and I said, I think I'm going to quit my job and learn how to farm. And that was pretty much it. Once I said it out loud, I told my wife. She was like, let's think about this over the weekend. That was Thursday night. She's like, let's talk about this over the weekend. The next morning at like 6 a.m., I told my boss, so I'm going to quit my job and learn how to farm. And it was just like a light had switched. I was just completely compelled to make that dream a reality. And there have been a lot of ups and downs of that, including the wildfires that we were referencing. But the important thing is that the dream really actually hasn't changed at all. So the motivating factor, like my North Star on this process, has been to connect more with nature and to share that with people, share that the joy and the health benefits and all the things that I get out of connecting more directly with nature. And so the hotel was our vehicle for doing that. We were going to have people come stay at the hotel. It's on 300 acres. They're going to eat food from the farm and have this, direct experience with nature. The hotel burnt down. We're not doing that, So these products, these live events, the different the podcasting and different things that I do around the brand, these are all aimed at trying to live a life in connection with nature and to share that with people. So the vehicle has changed to the skincare products you're holding as opposed to a hotel that we're developing. But this underlying passion, the thing that gets me up in the morning, was the same for all of these projects. So looking back on the fires, I look back on them, frankly, with like a sense of gratitude and relief almost. It was the hardest thing in my life. And I'm just like, man, thank God that happened.
And it led you to do exactly what you're supposed to be doing.
Thank God. Like, it's hard to imagine living on that mountain, facing constant threat of smoke and fire, having invested everything into building these buildings in that location, and then having to occupy it 70-80% of the time, 365 days a year, with like very high expectation guests where anything can go wrong, and it was going to be a nightmare, really. And I was just absolutely so blinded by my desire to do it that the fires woke me up to other options, and I'm super grateful for all the hardships that happened then. I mean, it just feels like necessary.
Yes. Yeah, necessary is a good word to describe it. And also when you were speaking about your time in New York working on the stock exchange, you were just making me think about how many people are not actually pursuing their dreams at all. They're just going down this path that's practical, conventional, makes sense. And then you have goals associated with that profession, and maybe you get a dopamine hit from achieving those goals or making a certain amount of money. But like that red barn that popped up in your subconscious mind, that was a dream that was kind of just smacking you in the face, which is why you were spending hours sourcing your food and cooking all these different meals and writing these blog posts. And it's funny how I feel like a lot of times God almost smacks you in the face with the thing that you're supposed to be doing. But the difficult part is really mustering up that courage to just pull the ripcord. And it's a really simple decision. It's just very difficult to do. And I do think the learnings that you had from that Czech practitioner, that's really the ethos of our show, is that it's not healthy for the sake of being healthy. It's building this like incredible body of confidence so you have the courage to be able to make those decisions or start that business or just live fully in alignment with who you're supposed to be. And I feel like you're such a good example of that.
I really do have Paul's Dreamline teaching to thank for that. I mean, especially after the fires, because if you looked at me after the fires, you would have been right to think like, this guy just lost everything. Like, people were sad for me, like they felt bad for me for sure. Like, they're like, oh my God, this guy's been working on this for 10 years. Like, that was his whole dream.
And what was your mindset when that happened?
I felt like that for a minute. And then I actually felt sort of confused for a while, like bordering on depressed. But that was because the actual sort of like couple days, like I was immediately on it, and I was like, for the first 24 hours, I was like, oh my God, we're going to get emergency permits from FEMA. We're going to expedite everything. We're going to build the hotel even quicker now. Like, this is all still happening. Within 24 hours, I realized that was, for a variety of reasons, that was not happening. For sure not happening. And yet we thought we were still going to restore that property and live there and come up with other revenue streams for doing so, agricultural, other ways of working the land and trying to make money besides developing a hotel there. And so I had all this confusion about how to do that, what that would look like. But ultimately we decided that we wouldn't be staying there and that we'd be relocating to Texas. And even still at that point, I had this sort of confusion. And the confusion was around the fact that I didn't wake up on my own, you know? The confusion was like, well, if not for these fires, I'd still be doing all of that. And yet after the fires, I now feel like this is the best path for my family. Granted, it was like perhaps the only path, but I sort of was in a place where I was feeling like happy that we were out of California, happy that we were living in Texas, happy that we were starting over without the hotel project. Like I had kind of come full circle on a lot of stuff, but I was still just hung up on this idea that like I was heading down the wrong path and not picking up on the signs until I got smacked so hard by the wildfires that I finally listened. And so I just had to have a little bit of grace with myself around that.
Yeah.
And it kind of like dissolved. Like once I kind of finally put my fingers on it, actually I called my brother and I just said, man, I'm just so cloudy headed. I have no idea what to do next, you know? Like the hotel was no longer, and the skincare business was essentially in its infancy. I mean, it still kind of is, but even more so. And he was like, well, why don't you just lean into that cloudiness? Maybe there's something there for you, you know? Don't resist it. Just lean in. And so I took that day to just be cloudy. And I went on slow walks and I read books in the bath. And by the end of the day, I was feeling back to my normal self. It was just like, the thing that brought me a lot of peace actually was there's this story about Rudolf Steiner who developed this, like their headquarters, let's call it, called the Goetheanum. And it was one of the most incredible buildings ever designed, like architecturally speaking. And it was all out of wood, and an arsonist burnt it down. And so, sidebar, they rebuilt it out of concrete, and it still exists, and it's awesome to go visit, which I had the opportunity to do last year in Switzerland. But when Rudolf Steiner, after the wooden one burnt down, he basically had the feeling that that whole group is called anthroposophy, the Anthroposophical Society, but anthroposophy is Rudolf Steiner's body of wisdom. He said after this, the spirit of anthroposophy is now in the ether. You know, that building burnt up, the smoke went up, and now it's in the ether of the entire planet. And he said, I predict in, I forget how many years, but 2050 or whatever, I predict there will be versions of this Goetheanum all around the world in various locations. And so I found a lot of peace in that. Like, I feel like when the hotel concept burnt down, the spirit of it expanded, you know? It went from this unarguably large 300-acre property, which felt large when you're standing in the middle of it, but compared to the whole rest of the world, I mean, we now sell skincare products to people all around the world, and we host events all around the world, and we talk on podcasts to people all around the world. And so the spirit and the essence of our dream actually sort of expanded when the physical challenge of it, the physical ability for us to even execute on it, quote unquote, burnt down.
And it's also clear when you're speaking too that one of your gifts is you are either, whether it's natural or you've cultivated it, you're an amazing teacher and you're so passionate about this. So I do wonder, you know, what would the version of Jared look like had that hotel been thriving and flourishing? I'm sure you would have found a way to continue to teach, but I'm sure not to the extent that you have now, the ability to share the message and have conversations like this and host these events and be able to educate through your products. There's this whole version of you that might have never come to fruition.
It's possible. I think that these are the types of things that we would have put on showcase at the hotel had it come to fruition. Like the event program, the Italy trip, the event we're hosting in 2 weeks here in Texas. These are the types of activities you could have imagined doing had you come stay with us in person. Really what we did is we flipped the business model on its head. Instead of people coming to the property or people coming to us, like we now go to people. And so the products can, like there's people in Germany, there's people all over the place who email me and they say, you know, really beautiful, moving feedback about what the products mean to them and how it, you know, is a big part of their day and a big part of their life. And the hotel experience would have been like very expensive and hard for the overwhelming majority of the world's population to ever come to. It was a 9-room hotel in Sonoma, California. I mean, but it's a lot easier to ship these products to people all around the world. So there's ways that it changed dramatically, completely. Everything in surface reality changed, except the dream really remained the same. And so to have what Paul called, like, just to speak to it for a second, in his language, if the dream is a bullseye on a target and you're an archer and you shoot a bow and arrow at it, the line between you and the bullseye, that's your dream. And the way you walk down your dream line is by having values that you create for yourself, in his case, in 4 categories: Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Happy. And so there's a whole process to that. But to have a system in place for making decisions moment by moment that are dream affirmative and allow me to walk down my dream line, the important thing being I have a dream and I've identified where it is. Otherwise, I'm just walking in circles. So that fact that I had a North Star that I wanted to keep making dream affirmative decisions and walking towards, you know, I'm not saying that I was suicidal, but in a loose sense of the word, like, I feel like it saved my life. Because I don't know, I would have just been so absolutely depressed if I thought that my dream burnt down in those fires.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's like the dream was constant. It was just the actual vision changed, and you're probably giving your wife and your daughter a maybe even a better quality of life than what you would have had in California too.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, California was not a super friendly place during and after COVID.
I'm sure.
So at least for people like us.
Definitely. Yeah, Texas is where you should be.
Our kind of people.
Yeah.
We had already sort of fully committed to homeschooling at that point. We didn't even have an education opportunity in California. We had been involved in some like health freedom, homeschool cooperative type situations where people were gathering and doing stuff with their kids. But after the fires, with the hotel not being possible, there was just no chance that that project was that piece of land was what I was attached to. You know, being on that piece of land and having that relationship of stewardship with a piece of land was like felt like a lifetime commitment for sure. I mean, we were living as if we were going to be there and buried there, you know, 75 years from now. So I think I'm just rambling now.
No, it's been an incredible ride, and it's really cool for me, and I think the listener too, just to hear this full context. And I think people will be able to take your story and probably implement it to the specific perceived adversities or trials and tribulations that they're going through. But
everybody's got a fire.
Everyone's got a fire.
That's what I've found since the fire. People will say shit to me, and I'll be like, well, you know, that reminds me of the actual fires we had. You know, because the metaphorical fire and the actual fire are not that different.
Yeah.